growth, and many more. Achieving these goals will be a major milestone towards upliftment of these backward areas. It is an honor to welcome our chair for this session, Keshi Dorji Damdula, Director, Tibet House, our co-chair, Mr. Pramatesh Ambasta, CEO, Bharat Rural Livelihoods Foundation, and our eminent speakers, Mr. Pankaj Mathur, Mr. Deepak Roy, and Mr. Prabhat Kumar. May I now kindly request all the speakers to please take their seats on the dais. Geshe Dorji Damdula, Director of Tibet House, is a distinguished Buddhist scholar whose interest lies in the relation between Buddhism and science, especially in physics.
Our co-chair for the session is Mr. Pramatesh Ambasta, CEO, Bharat Rural Livelihoods Foundation. Mr. Pramatesh Ambasta is an eminent and renowned expert in the areas of rural development, livelihoods, entitlement of marginalized communities, and watershed management. Our third speaker for the session is Mr. Pankaj Mathur. Mr. Pankaj Mathur is a senior expert in water, sanitation, and hygiene, and worked across UN and various government sectors for a significant years.
It is with great honor that may now introduce to you the speaker of our session, Mr. Deepak Roy. Mr. Deepak Roy is a senior professional in the social development sector and has worked across multilateral agencies like UNICEF, the World Bank, bilateral agencies, as well as private sector. As a WASH specialist for UNICEF, he has been instrumental in implementing UNICEF's drinking water and sanitation program in several states in India, such as Delhi, and provided technical support to UNICEF in Nigeria to initiate sanitation marketing approach as an international consultant. He has pioneered marketing strategy in sanitation sector in early 2000 in Bihar.
Let me request Ms. Sujata Sonik and Mr. Naveen Jain, please come on the dais. We would like to release our Pradanya post, and we would like to use this opportunity to release that with your presence, sir. Please, ma'am, please, sir. Dr. Pankaj Gupta, please. So they will join. No, we'll be here. So, listen.
This is very good work. आपने इतने फटाफट कर दी. आओ नवीन.
आइए मैम.
सबके अंदर है. There are so many. There are just this one.
Now, this tabloid has been produced by the students, faculty members, media consultants of this IIHMR within 10 hours of the last days, and give it big hand to the team which has produced it. Yes, you can speak on.
Thank you so much. I'm going to give this one.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramesh and team. So, you can start.
I would also like to welcome Mr. Prabhat Kumar, who is a National Thematic Manager, Child Protection with Save the Children, headquartered in Gurgaon. He owes a robust understanding in areas of child rights, gender equality, social justice, and accountability to his work with Save the Children. We welcome you all. I now request the chair of the session to kindly proceed.
Good afternoon, all of you. It's a great joy for me to be here in the IIHMR University. And Dr. Pankajji, who I know for the last several years, has been a great inspiration to me in many ways. So all the students here and all the students and faculties of the university, for sure, you will reap the benefit out of he being the president of university. So without much ado, I'd like to, this session, as you already know, we have a co-chair here and the three speakers, and unfortunately, one speaker could not make for the reasons of, okay, sorry. Okay. So basically, here we are talking about the rural development and the effective implementation of the SDG 2030. And we have the eminent speakers here, and I'll be happy to see that this is going to be like the way the earlier presentation happened, the panel happened. We're going to have like each of us going to speak for about like 5-10 minutes, and then I'll leave this to the floor for question and answers. And interestingly, interacting with some of my colleagues here, the topics that they have chosen for their presentation is really very interesting. And then meanwhile, you may be wondering that what I'm going to speak on. In fact, just to connect to this topic and to what you're doing here, the topic that I'm given is how to bring about emotional balance within one's own mind on the basis of the practice of the mindfulness, which seems to be a little out of track of the mainstream discussion of this talk. But if you look at the SDG 17 points, we see that this is one of the crucial points that we have to keep in mind. So with this in mind, it was 4 years ago that I was in Pune, that I was giving a series of lectures in Pune University, and then Infosys, a Pune section, invited me to give a talk. And the director of the Infosys Pune was not expecting so much turnout, the attendees. And then they organized the talk in just with a small hall with 100 capacity. And then while he was escorting me to the hall, he got a message from his colleague saying that the turnout is so huge, the smaller hall is too small. And of course, don't think that I'm popular, I'm no one. You will know the reason. And then they instantly moved to another big hall, 500 capacity, and there also, there were so many students, and not only students, the employees sitting on the aisles. And why? You may be wondering why the turnout was so huge. Was because that all the boys and girls, young boys and girls of your age, perhaps like 2-3 years older than you, they were all, how they're walking, how they're walking around, there's so much tense, I can feel that. So we are talking about the startups, we are talking about the developments, we are talking about the profits and so forth, the healthcare and so forth. Deep inside, we see that one of the early presenters said very beautifully that the problems of the world will not come to an end. So we have to try our best to solve the problem, and then new problems are bound to happen. So in this connection, say the people who are involved with these startups and who are very successful, even they have to go through problems. So this is where we need to have a very holistic implementation and holistic tackling on the basis of the SDG and 2030. Okay, with this in mind, I have the request that came to me was to speak about how to balance this material development that we're seeking, healthcare that we're seeking, with the mindfulness practice. So if you look at the slide there, so that is the 15 billion years ago, how the world came into being, the universe came into being. Say to extreme left is the original Big Bang, and then the whole universe that is in time, it started like that, and then to the extreme right, you see the whole universe there, the Milky Way galaxy, the nebulae, all these things you can see. And then these 0.3 million years ago, then Homo sapiens came into being, meaning the human beings come into being. 0.3 million years ago, Charles Darwin, how he presented the Homo sapiens coming on this earth 0.3 million years ago, and then these emotional states, happy, not happy, all these things, they come into being from there 0.3 million years ago. Now, say, if you look at the 17 points in SDG, and which my colleagues, they're going to present it so beautifully, I discussed with them. So we see that there are 4 main points there, 4 main points. And first we see the gross body that we have, gross body, related to which we talk about the healthcare. And today, one of the major talks is the healthcare. And then the subtle body, then vital energy within us, and the mind. And what we are talking about here is nothing to do with the esoteric, or something unseen. This is something, a real life, empirical reality, which we can experience. And strangely or coincidentally, what happened was that this morning, the whole talk was on the gross body, how to make more profit, startups, and then the pharmaceutical companies, and so forth. It's all about the gross body. So gross body, meant for what? If you explore, meant for what? Meant to bring about the solve our mental problems. For example, all the health facilities starts related to the health. They are to tackle our physical body, and eventually thereby to reduce our pain, depression, and so forth. So we go from the gross to the mind. Now here, I'm going to give the alternate way which the university requested me to do, mind to the body. Mind to the body. How to tackle the mind, so that we'll go to tackle the gross body that we have. So with this, what I'm saying is that if you go to the extreme, only tackling the gross body, not tackling the mind, will end up in depression. So much of materialism, and then the mind is neglected. And if you go too much into the mind, then who's going to take care of the body? So we should have the combination of the two. To be very realistic, we should have the combination of two to make sure that we take care of the physical, material, the requirements, plus the mental, emotional health. Both are to be taken care of. So here, now to how to tackle from the body to the mind. This is all the medical, the systems, and the startups that would make a body, to make our life easy. And how to tackle from the mind to the body, how to go from the bottom to the top. We see that there are 3 main points. One is by looking at the cognitive faculty of a mind. Number one, cognitive faculty of the mind, how the mind sees things. And then on that basis, how the mind sees things, and then your emotional states like depression, anxiety, happiness, peace, they are created, number one. Then number two is affective faculty. Affective faculty related to that is a positive psychology. So affective faculty meaning that your sense of affinity towards things, that I'm happy, I'm not happy, I like this, I don't like this, I like iPhone 11, not iPhone 6. Okay, this affinity. So that is about the affective faculty. And then I like my family, I don't like my neighbor. Then the number three is the meditative concentration. So this is the third area. I'm going to speak a little bit about the first and second, just for your information. But there are so many youngsters here. It is so important that I want the youngsters, you the youngsters, not to end up like the youngsters who are working in Infosys Pune. So much of stress there, how they walk. From there I could see that there's so much stress there. They're making money, but mentally they are so much stressed and unhappy and depressed. So this is what I don't like you to enter into. So for that matter, we need to take up these three things, and I'll quickly relate these three things before I jump to the invite the other presenters. So finally, to tackle all the problems, the challenges of life, the mind decides whether you're happy, unhappy, whether you are stressful, depressed, or whether you are successful, not successful. It's all determined by your own mind. It's not just the material. Material is very important, but the mind plays the most crucial role. So the point is that if the mind is tackled, then all the rest is being taken care of, but then the rest will help us to take care of the mind. Okay, this is a little technical. Okay, so now about the cognitive thought process, how your mind thinks, cognitive thought process, that, for example, say those people from Albert Einstein, on this earth, there's only one Albert Einstein, and he's so respected. For what? For his cognitive, the sharpness of his cognitive thought process. So this cognitive thought process, the more subtler you see the reality, more defined is your cognitive thought process. More defined your cognitive thought process, your life is going to be more qualitative. Your life is going to be more qualitative. The more qualitative you are, the thought process is, the cognitive thought process. So here we see that what constitutes the ontological reality. To bring about change in the cognitive thought process, what you see, for example, to give you one very simple example, so this little technical about the subjectivity, quantum physics, and so forth, but to give you a very simple example, say you are in dream, and you dream of being chased by a ghost or a tiger, and you run. There's so much of fear in you. This fear is because, why so much of fear there? You would say that is because of the tiger coming to attack me. Then when the tiger is about to attack you, your mother wakes you up. What happens? The fear dissolves. You get such a feeling of relief. So how this relief came to you? Because of realizing that the cognitive thought process in the dream was mistaken. When you realize that, the fear dissolves. When you are under the sway of this erroneous cognitive thought process, the fear arises. So to have the correct cognitive thought process plays a very important role to dissolve our fears, depression, and so forth. So this is the quantum physics is talking about ontological reality, what the subtle reality is. Okay. And then again with the cognitive thought process, we see that many of the depressions, the problems, all the health issues, there are about like 300 million people suffering from depression on this earth today. 300 million people, and more to come. So this is one of the root causes of this depression is because of failing to see the reality in relative terms.
So the need for us to see things in relative terms, which is so important. So the relativity of space and time, relative space, time and mind. So this relativity, if you see, for example, to give you one example, because of the shortage of time, say I'm in Delhi, and then the people tell me, how do you survive in Delhi? Acute weather, 47 degrees centigrade, and terrible cold in the winter, and so much of pollution, air pollution. How do you survive? I said that Delhi is a beautiful place, because one time from Delhi, I landed to Pune, and there my host came to pick me up at the airport, and the host was sweating. And I said, Pune is very pleasant weather. And my host said that, no, you're joking, it's so hot. I said, no, it's so pleasant, I could feel the breeze. He said, no, it's sweating, he's really sweating. I said, okay, now I realize I'm so thankful to Delhi. Because of Delhi, wherever I travel, I could feel the breeze everywhere. It's all because of Delhi. Whereas people elsewhere in the country, they don't feel the breeze, they feel the heat. Whereas somebody from Delhi could feel the breeze. There's such a joy there. This is because of Delhi's weather. So there we see the relativity. When you see the relativity, then the sense of joy comes in you. So that is very important, to see the reality in the relative terms. This is so important. And all the health, to have a holistic health, SDG, the 2030, talking about the holistic health. So for that matter, the root of the holistic health is unconditional love. Effective faculty, positive psychology to relieve 300 million people from depression. The solution lies in the unconditional love. Antidepressants are there. Pharmaceutical companies may not be too happy with me saying that unconditional love is the solution. But this is the solution. Even the people who sell these medicines, who are running these pharmaceutical companies, they also have to go through depression. So final answer lies in the unconditional love. Okay, I don't want to go into detail. If there's any question later on, I will be happy to do that. And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama has adopted what is known as the universal ethics concept to tackle the problems of the world today. And this university, I learned that you have adopted this C-learning program, social, emotional, ethical learning program. So this is a part of the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm very happy that this vision is for the world and that this university has adopted this. Okay, meditative concentration. Okay, today we'll do a very quick meditative concentration practice here. Very quick. Okay, are you ready? For that matter, this is very important. If you learn this is a very secular meditation. Very secular, and everyone can do that. But even you are a non-believer, you can do that. So for that matter, we need to keep in mind 4 points. One is a body posture. Number 2 is a focal point. Number 3 is identifying the errors of meditation. Number 4, applying the remedies to overcome the errors. So if you can do that for like 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, every day, guaranteed that your mental stress, depression, and eventually the decline of your immune system will be stopped or minimized, mitigated. This is extremely important point. For that matter, okay, we'll quickly do that. First, body posture. Let us all sit upright. Let us all sit upright. Don't lean against the support. Sit upright. Okay, body posture. And then the eyes not closed. Eyes 45 degrees, half open, 45 degrees cast down. It's going to be a very secular meditation. Anybody can do that. Just to control your mind, and that it is not being pulled by the depression and stress. If you learn how to control this mind, and then this is amazing. Unnecessary depression, stress, and so forth will be just mitigated by this practice. Okay, so what we're going to focus on is just focus on a tiny white dot between nose and upper lip. Just touch the spot between nose and upper lip. Touch the spot between nose and upper lip. Okay, this is a spot where you're going to focus on a tiny white dot, 1 mm or 2 mm diameter. And then meanwhile, multitasking, counter breath, breathe in, breathe out, 1, breathe in, breathe out, 2. This is what you do for 21 cycles. Okay, this is your focal point. Number 3, identifying the errors of meditation. Number 3 is so important. Make sure that when you do this practice, meditation, you don't fall prey to mental laxity. Sleepiness should not happen. Mental excitement, mental scattering should not happen. These two things, the inactivity of the mind, laxity, and the overactivity of the mind, which is mental excitement. These two should not happen. If any of these two things happen, don't worry, go for the next, which is applying the remedies to overcome the errors. Apply remedies. 2 remedies. One is the introspection and the other one is mindfulness. Introspection is to check your mind, to keep an eye on your mind to see if your mind is meditating or is distracted or in relaxed state. And if you see that it's distracted or in relaxed state, then apply the mindfulness, which is to bring the mind back to the intended object of meditation. Okay, we're ready. We're going to do for 21 times. Ready? Just try to dissociate yourself from ruminating over the past experiences. Detach yourself from anticipating for the future events and stop yourself engaging in the 5 sensory objects. Be in the present moment, just follow the breath and the tiny white dot. Okay, 21 times. Ready? Good. Start. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the SDG 2030, I'd like to summarize on the basis of what is said by Albert Einstein. So you can read there, Albert Einstein, to your right side is the Albert Einstein giving his Nobel address after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. And then this is his quote. It's a beautiful quote. It will summarize what SDG the 7 is, 2030 is. Human being is a part of the world, whole by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she experiences himself or herself. Their thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest are a kind of optical delusion of their consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So the holistic approach to health pertaining to compassion, to enlarge the circle of compassion, that is the key to the harmony of the world, to the peace of the world. Okay, so let me invite first that the order may be, we may alter the order a little bit. First, I'd like to invite Mr. Deepak Roy, and of course, I will hand over to our co-chair, later for the question and answer session, and the co-chair will also speak. So meanwhile, Mr. Deepak Roy, he's going to give us the overview of the SDG 2030, the 17 points, and then we have the other speakers who will be more specialized in the specific points. Okay, I welcome Mr. Deepak ji.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't imagine a better introduction to the Sustainable Development Goal. Thank you, Your Excellency, Your Holiness, Domidol. Because I think the whole the concept of sustainable development goal, SDGs, is, I'm sure most of you, especially those who are in the rural management course, I'm sure you have. How many have heard about SDGs? Just the word. Excellent. I think that's about roughly 85%. Everyone knows about it. So, but still, so I'll not be saying anything earth-shattering, just so that we all come on the same page. Why Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they're referred to? They were adopted in 2015. Can you have the overhead, please? Not that it matters. It was adopted in 2015 as a universal call for action to end poverty, protect the planet. Right, so we're on the same page now. Protect the planet, and I think I'll call you Mr. I don't know how you refer to Mr. Dorji. Mr. Dorji referred to the connecting to the, it's one universe, and actually I'm reminded, I'm being slightly, allow me the indulgence, there's this beautiful song by Beatles. How many have heard? Imagine there's no heaven. Yes. I wish someone could sing it, or maybe sometime if you could play it's a wonderful song which I think John Lennon wrote in 1960s sometime, and it still remains on the bestsellers list. I think it captures the spirit of what Mr. Dorji just talked about. So it's basically protecting the planet. We're not talking about a district, state, country, or continent. We're talking of the whole planet. And ensure that all people, all is underscored, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Peace, I'm sorry, my pronunciation maybe is not very good. Peace is what Mr. Dorji just talked about. And the brief 21 cycles of meditation, I think it gave us those who, I have practiced Vipassana meditation for just one course, and I know how much peace, how much inner contentment it brings. So, but here we are talking about, I suppose, more practical peace. If the world was in a disturbed state, I don't think we could have had a much worse period than this in in the global history. What is happening today in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, etc., all over and elsewhere, I think. These are events about which we cannot probably do anything sitting in Jaipur maybe, but we need to be aware, and especially young people. The future of this planet belongs to you, and I mean it very seriously. I'm not making an empty rhetoric statement. Okay, but the Sustainable Development Goal, the whole concept, it's a huge. There are 17 linked goals, interlinked in the sense that they have been designed or they have been worded in such a way that they connect to each other. So they're like a whole, they're not discrete silos, they're not individual, they're like a wonderful fabric which your Sanganer weavers or Sanganer designers, everything comes together, the fabric and the color and everything, and it becomes a beautiful garment. But it has some 169 targets. The goals are integrated, as we said, but no one should be left behind. I think that's the operative part of it. It's everybody must come through in the same development process. But why SDGs? I think these are the 17 goals. I'm not getting into each one. Frankly speaking, let me say that I don't remember. My colleague Pankaj said he could recall about 8 of them as extempore. But they're there. Each one of them is relevant. And to my mind, the 17th goal is actually the most important thing, in a way, the partnerships. Because long back in one of our, in fact, in the previous session, we heard so much about what can happen if the private sector and the government, and we had Mrs. I'm sorry, I can't. Can I get the? Mrs. Sonik, yeah, Mrs. Sonik, which she was chairing, and we had these results of potential and actually ongoing partnerships in the industry, pharma industry and healthcare industry, and what enormous possibilities that can emerge. Having said that, I think we should, why these sustainable development goals? There have been all kinds of declarations like you started with probably 1978, the Alma Mater Health for All declaration, and then we had the International Water Supply Sanitation Decade, about which some of us are more familiar because we have worked on the water sanitation sector. Then the Millennium Development Goals came. How many are familiar with the MDGs? Have you heard the name? Okay, great. So you know what happened in MDGs, and at the end of the period, that is 2000 to 2015, when the global community took stock, and there was a UN-supported discussion, they thought, obviously, the achievements had been somewhat skewed. Some had been achieved, some had not done so well. So then the leaders, the global leaders, the heads of states, many of them, heads of state, actually got together, and they said, let's have a longer vision of another 15 years by 2030. These are the sort of, processes that, these are the kind of things that happen. Why SDG? Because when a head of a state, when a government makes a commitment, there is a much greater effort goes into the process. So it doesn't remain just a statement in a book. Report cards are prepared by, owned up by governments, and more resources have come in. Typically, global resources have come in to the less developed countries, or those who are still developing. And as I said, it's a global commitment. So developed countries are also supposed to put in from 0.15 to 0.2% of their GDP or gross national income for official development assistance to the developed countries, to the less developed countries. And more important, transfer of environment-friendly technologies, capacity building, and open up the trade system, non-discriminatory trade systems, which are really challenging areas, knowing what is happening today in the global trade and all the problems that are happening in WTO, for instance, and increase capacity of export of the developing countries. But the more important part is the improving the gathering and analysis of disaggregated data. Yesterday's sessions, I think we heard so much about the data analytics and its importance. How generating data is certainly important, data integrity is important, but it's also much more important to look at how these chunks of data relate to each other. In India, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, MOSP, Government of India has taken the lead, and it's prepared a set of 306 indicators relating to the first 16 goals. Another 41 are to be prepared because the baseline report has just come in recently. It has been released in June, I think, by the ministry. So, and these all have been put together in a national indicator framework, which looks like this. I've given the site reference for those who are interested. It's just about 300 pages of various statistical data indicators. There's a high-level steering committee also, which has been established, chaired by the Chief Statistician of India, come the Secretary, Ministry of Statistics, with other members of the Niti Aayog. So it's a large decision-making, planning and decision-making body. So that's the National Indicator Framework, NIF, as it's referred to. So what are the risks in implementing the SDGs? See, what I'll do is my colleague Pankaj will, ex-colleague actually, we worked together in UNICEF some time back. Pankaj will get into the details of particularly, and Mr. Kumar later, and I'm sure Parshuram will also talk about it as the, in a broader sense. But some of the risks in implementing this, SDGs, it seems too ambitious and unmanageable to me. And this is my personal opinion. I don't represent any organization. 1 minute, yeah. So it's probably too ambitious and unmanageable. Data validation is by independent sources. Okay. So data validation and monitoring by independent sources. Siloed approach. See, because they do, as I said earlier, they're all related to each other. Pankaj will talk about how water, sanitation, hygiene contributes to health. I will make a brief reference to how it contributes to nutrition. So the nutrition, health, water, sanitation, at the bottom is, these are the contributing factors. And we heard about poverty yesterday, how poverty and health, I think yesterday, yes. So these are all related issues. But on the other hand, climate change. Climate change is again another area where so much needs to be done, but it also affects individual states, different stakeholders in different ways. So they could come in conflict. And finally, sort of policy coherence at the policy level, so that focusing on certain goals might have unintended consequences. For instance, a particular, the private sector, manufacturing sector might decide that they want to improve production and employment, but on the other hand, it may not. It may result in pollution in other ways affecting the environment. I'll just introduce WASH. I think you can take this up later in detail, naturally. So the WASH goal 6, it has several indicators. One is achieving universal and equitable and access to safe and affordable drinking water. Also include ensuring access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene. But most important, end of open defecation. Building toilets will not necessarily result in people using them. Improving water quality, increasing water use efficiency across all sectors, which is domestic and industrial, etc. Integrated water resource management, protecting and restoring water-related ecosystems, which is wetlands and so on. Expanding international cooperation and capacity building support for water harvesting, desalination, a whole range of related issues. Support and strengthen participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management systems. This is just two maps. It's slightly misleading because the first one shows the impact of the level of malnutrition. You see, back in 1996, Dr. Ramlingaswamy, who was the Director General of ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, he and two other colleagues, Dr. John Rody was the head of UNICEF, and Dr. Urban Johnson, they wrote a paper called Asian Enigma. which showed that food availability, although per capita food availability is worse in sub-Saharan Africa in 15 countries than as compared to India. In fact, the 8 South Asian countries, the level of nutrition was much worse in these countries. I think about 51% as opposed to 32% in the African countries. So they looked into it, the system, what are the causes? Intuition would tell, normal intuitive understanding would be that if you have more food, you have better nutrition standard. But actually they turned out it was counterintuitive. So they looked at 3 factors. They identified 3 factors. One was women's education, women's literacy standards, women's level of empowerment of women, and the third was sanitation. Sanitation particularly because in the Gangetic Plain, Bihar, UP, parts of MP, and so on, the population density is so much, and level of sanitation then was so poor that it was affecting. In fact, it continued to be this data is 2011. Basically, you can see, just focus, instead of getting distracted, we could look at how the level of malnutrition and sanitation is related, particularly in India. So this is just, maybe, will you make a reference to this later? Pankaj will make a reference to this later. I want to make quick reference to, I don't know how much do I have, 2 minutes? 1 minute? 1 minute. Okay, so I'll just make a quick reference to the importance of monitoring. I'm calling it fact check, because this is what the status is. This is from the figures in the first row are all drawn from the ministry's website, the Department of Drinking Water Supply's website. And it shows, as of 2019, November, 100%. That means all 36 states and union territories. In each one of them, 100% sanitation has been achieved. But when you look at other sort of related databases at different time points, this is what you see. For instance, in 2016-17, the coverage data from the joint monitoring program of WHO and UNICEF, it shows 53% coverage as against 65%. There are definitional issues, but broadly there is a congruence in terms of the the references. So there was a difference of 12 percentage points. And the proportion practicing open defecation, 36, because this is, as I said, as long as people defecate in the open, no matter how many toilets you build, it's not going to make any difference to the overall enteropathology or the epidemiological terms. It will not make any difference. So this is just one data set. As regards Rajasthan, which should interest you, and this is particularly interesting because IIHMR has actually come up with this data, which is ongoing. This is a partnership with, I'm sure some of you have seen the office behind the canteen, which is the performance management, what's it called? Performance management and accountability. Good. So the accountability is again in fact, I would like to know a little more, how are you going to ensure the accountability part? Monitoring is fine. Who's accountable? The state actors, the masons, the whoever. I really would like to get some kind of idea regarding this. So these are the figures, and you can see, I don't have to, I think they're self-explanatory. I don't have to see the gaps in terms of what you see in the first row and the second row. The second row is, of course, open defecation. But clearly, if 99%, we assume that, because usually, maybe Gautam can throw some light at the end of this session, and he can, because I think you were guiding, some of you were involved in the discussion. Yes. No, it's done. I'm nearly done. So, what can we how can we help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? I think one thing that is important is a shared vision across all stakeholders at all levels. And I think this question of shared vision also came up. I can't remember exactly, I'm an old man. I can't remember who exactly made a mention, but somebody talked about sharing a shared vision with all stakeholders in the larger health sector. Partnerships of the essence with the private sector, with civil society, and with local governments. Participatory monitoring at decentralized level, particularly with the strong panchayat institutions that we have, and user groups, maybe civil society groups can be brought in also. Learning exchange is something which we found in UNICEF extremely valuable at one time when the states and particularly the government and non-government stakeholders used to come together. They were hugely, the results were fabulous because everybody talked about the innovations that they were doing locally, and that got scaled up in many ways. So we can discuss that. Effective data gathering systems are important. I want to close this particular theme with how change of behavior is important. Many of us have been using the public loo, the toilet upstairs here or elsewhere in the hotel. How many men, okay, I go to the men's toilet, how many men have used the toilet? Only 3? No. I have seen, now the younger people have gone to the toilet, men's room, urinal. Nobody has gone to the urinal in the last 2 days? Oh, okay. What I'm trying to say is that if you see the urinal stalls, at least 2 or 3 of them are usually wet. Why does it happen? Why does it happen? Because we're just careless, that's all. Okay, on that happy or unhappy note, I'll close. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dibakji. Now let me invite Mr. Pankajji. 10 minutes.
And you want me to present from there? Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Chair and the members of the dais. I'm not new to the IHMR and I'm also not new to this group. And I was so happy to see when I was actually outside, some of the students came and then they actually remembered that, I've been taking a couple of classes over here. But what I'm going to speak here is about what actually Deepak said and then the continuation of this, that the SDGs are important. And again, linking with what Mr. Dorji said, that, mind and soul. And each of the SDG is, in my opinion, it's either mind or soul. So how do we actually connect mind and soul? When we really see in terms of, the health of the children and mothers in this world, we know that, there are causes of the deaths of, young children as well as, mothers. And especially there are 3 diseases which are, there is one disease which is actually, considered to be one of the killers. It's basically, the sepsis and also, diarrheal diseases, which are the major cause of deaths of children as well as, mothers, especially during, and after pregnancies. And there are, the impact of individual interventions. And Deepak talked about, the importance of water sanitation hygiene and how important, water sanitation hygiene are really. So if you see, the most cost-effective interventions in this world, which can save lives of, millions of mothers and children around the world, either it is related to sanitation, water, and, many of them are, of course, related to health. But Deepak talked about, the importance of drinking water, importance of sanitation, importance of, key hygiene behaviors, as simple as hand washing. All these are, essential interventions which really saves lives of, mothers and children. So how do we, think about, linking these 2 important indicators or SDGs? I should actually, say the goal 6, as Deepak already introduced, talks about, water sanitation hygiene. And we know that, in water sanitation hygiene, we talk about toilets, we talk about drinking water availability, we talk about hygiene practices, we also talk about institutional sanitation. Whereas in the goal 3, which is basically directly related to health, we talk about health of mothers and children, specifically related to all the health associated infections and how children can be saved. So there is an area where we know that these two things are really supposed to be linked and gelled very well together, but not much of a work has actually happened, which is basically the health centers, where we know that millions of children take birth almost, I mean, if we really talk about on a daily basis, millions of children take birth, but we know what is the status of our health centers, and specifically issues related to the infection control measures. So my presentation and also the introduction of a work which we have done with in association with IIHMR, initially starting in Rajasthan and then now taking up to a scale in state of Madhya Pradesh, talks about the important intervention of water sanitation, hygiene in health and nutrition rehabilitation centers. It talks about how the health staff can be motivated to work together to make their facilities clean, make their facilities infection-free, directly contributing to the life of children. And our estimation is that, through this intervention, we have been, till now, been able to almost reach more than, 100,000 children every year, where we are actually ensuring that the children take birth in a safe and clean environment. So what's there in healthcare facilities in Madhya Pradesh, what has happened in last couple of years? And again, as I said, I really proudly can say at this moment that IIHMR has been part of it. They have been our, critical technical partner to this. But again, at the same time, the initiative taken up by the National Health Mission of Madhya Pradesh. And I was actually seeing Naveen Jain sir sitting over here. So he was again, one of the pioneers in initiating this work in Rajasthan when I was actually working in Rajasthan before. So learning from Rajasthan, replicated and also, taken up a scale in Madhya Pradesh. So what it talks about, I mean, I think these are some of the familiar figures which, if you see, irrespective of the state, in last many years, we have been able to, work a lot in terms of reducing the infant mortality rate, under 5 mortality rate. And this is the status of Madhya Pradesh, but, it's not very different in any other part of the world or specifically in India, where a lot of effort has gone in terms of, institutional deliveries and reducing the infant mortality and under 5 mortality a lot. But again, at the same time, what we have not been able to do across the country is, reducing the neonatal mortality, and specifically the early neonatal mortality, which has almost remained constant in last 10 years. So we need to think that, what is something which is not happening at the level of, health centers, where children are actually, or the newborns are actually taking birth, and mothers are actually, continuously visiting, be it, your ANC or during the delivery or maybe after the delivery. So we need to, improve the systems over there. We need to improve the service delivery mechanisms over there. We need to improve the monitoring over there. So this is what we have done in Madhya Pradesh, that we have worked in the 9 most critical districts of the state, where the health indicators and wash indicators are really poor. We have worked in high delivery load facilities because we know that our work will be directly contributing to the most marginalized communities. We know that our work will be directly contributing to most of the mothers and children, and almost kind of an area where we strategically have worked on a critical pathway of acquiring infection, starting from your outpatient department and then labor rooms, sick neonatal care units, and postnatal wards, and ultimately working on improving water sanitation hygiene. And this is actually linked with the bigger work of National Health Mission and Swachh Bharat Mission. So on the left hand side, if you can see in this slide, this was basically a pilot started in let's say 9 districts of Madhya Pradesh, but again it's scaled up across the state, and now it has been taken up as part of the strategy of the government in terms of improving the infection control measures contributed by water sanitation hygiene. These are the 9 districts which are there, where you can very well see all the 3 different levels of facilities have been included in this particular kind of intervention, be it primary health centers or community health centers or even the district hospitals. But the main focus is basically, reaching as many as children as possible. And I already given you the number, which is almost ever increasing, because when we started the job, and in the middle of the job, we were thinking that, maybe 100,000 children, but now there are more than 120,000 children every year, which are actually, I would say, which are being reached by this particular intervention. There are 3 different phases. Initially, we support the health facilities in doing a systematic assessment. In phase number 2, we provide them hand-holding support for improvements. And in the 3rd stage, we have actually helped the state government in formalizing the SOPs, the schedule of procedures, as well as, the scaling up strategy. I'll not go into detail of this slide, but again, the important part of a particular project is not, simply doing an assessment and providing them, the status, but again, providing the people a kind of hand-holding support, which help them, understanding the situation very well. We help them understand where are the resources, how can we, mobilize the resources, and at the end of the day, we can improve the facility. This is a simple, real-time monitoring tool which we actually used. It's a simple, I would say Android-based application where a medical officer in charge can simply, make a star grading of different components of the facility as well as the facility still. So we are sitting here in a 5-star hotel. We know it's a 5-star hotel because there are bare minimum standards which this particular facility is supposed to be, taking up. So similarly, a health facility can be given a 1-star to 4-star or 5-star kind of a rating. And if you are at the 3-star, you know that where are those 2 stars gap, where I need to work to improve my facility from 3-star to 5-star. So this is how it has been working. And you can see the picture of a gentleman who was the medical officer in charge of the first facility in Madhya Pradesh who got the 5-star. And this is how we have moved in last 2.5 years, that we had as low as 5.4% facilities which are 5-star, which are almost now 30%, and 4-star facilities. So 4 and 5-star are more than 50% facilities. The work has been actually identify one of the good practices. So it has been presented in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill last year. It has been identified as one of the good practice by UNICEF and WHO, and also national platforms. And these are a couple of pictures which I have just put like kind of improvement which are actually happening in these facilities. But the most important picture is this one. These are those proud members of the team who have actually improved their facilities to 5-star. And as I already said, this is ever increasing. This is not going to stop anywhere. So the important part of the takeaway from probably this session is that, as Deepak already pointed out, that we can't think about SDGs in silos, and we also need to see how different SDGs are contributing to each other. And third important part is that how can we mobilize the resources which are available in the national flagship programs to do as much as possible in our work. So I think, no, I have already finished. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much to the chair also.
Thank you so much. Precisely 10 minutes. Okay, next I'd like to invite Mr. Prabhat Kumarji. And his presentation, I listened to him already, the synopsis is very interesting. Please welcome Mr. Prabhatji.
Thank you so much. I'll try to stick to, in fact, 7 to 8 minutes, and that will give chance to others. Okay. So I'll not be making any presentation, but I'll just be talking about some of the key challenges related to SDGs and few words that we all should keep in mind. So I'm not going to tell you what those 17 goals are and what 169 targets is going to be. But let me remind everyone that we spoke about SDGs, and then we said one of the tagline that goes with SDGs, no one is left behind. And in a country like India, that's most important. You know why? Because we have been growing, okay? So it's no longer a poor country, it's country with poor pockets. So first of all, I would want to say that if we look at rural vis-a-vis urban area, so the challenges of rural area and urban area are not same, or rural area, the normal thinking that rural area is inaccessible, that's not the reality. If we go to some of the places in urban area, the real access in terms of accessing that health facility or education facility for urban poor is more challenging than rural areas. So that is something that we should keep in mind, that it's more, if we are talking about no one left behind, we should be equally cognizant that it's rural and urban everywhere. The poor pockets have to be identified, and that's where we focus on. And that is why we have stopped calling words which were very famous in our literature was hard to reach area. Sometimes the area which is very easy to reach is not being accessible. So that's one point. Second, I would want to highlight is one of challenges, and this is my request to people who are sitting here. An institute like IIHMR can make a difference. The students who will pass out, they should start thinking. You mentioned about the baseline report that Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has done along with Niti Aayog. One of the biggest challenge of that baseline report, do you know what it is? That they don't have any indicator for SDG goals 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17, which means we as a leaders sat in 2015 and decided that we will be achieving some of goals by 2030. And just let me remind you that there are certain goals which we have planned to achieve by 2020, 25 and 30. It's not only 2030 goals. And those are really ambitious. And if we were to achieve that, the first thing that we should have is, where are the indicators? Okay, so 4 years down the line, we are still struggling with indicators, and that is where we can make a lot of difference by seeing how do we develop indicators, what indicator can be used. SDG 16 and within 16, 16.2, which is one of my favorite, which talks about peace and protection measures. There is not even closest indicator that we can use from our existing planning statistics or other fields. And that is where I think we need to make difference. Third, most of indicators, if we talk about very asset or resource based, how much money is invested, what is the resources that are invested. One of the big thing and big workforce challenge in India, or when we work in development sector and being one of the practitioners, so one of challenge that we see is the challenge of behavioral, people who are trained on behavioral economics. Okay, and that is where you can make number of toilet, you can even provide water to the doorstep, but how it is being used or not used is big challenge. And most of people who are left behind are those people where there are social norms, traditional norms, attitude that restrict these things. And unless we work in true social behavioral change communication style with someone who is trained behavior economist, this is not going to work. So that's more. And last one that I would want to see is that, you know, for achieving these SDGs, we were just doing analysis of some of data, and I will give you one of example from Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is on gender equality, and there is indicator within that which talks about all forms of marriage, child early forced marriages will not take place by 2030. And I can assure you that with current speed, that's not feasible. And that is where we need to identify more and more barriers, more and more issues that needs to be added. I gave you example of behavioral change communication, and there are certain more use of technology is one more, but technology for positive use that needs to be reinforced. Otherwise, we have made significant progress. For example, between NFHS 3 and NFHS 4, there has been reduction in child marriage from 47% to 27%, which is 20 percentage point. But still, I'll tell you that if this can be done in 7-8 years' time, still we will not achieve this target by 2030 only because there are some drivers which remains unaddressed, and that is where we should be focusing more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mr. Balakumarji. Then next we have our co-chair, Mr. Pramadesh Ambassador.
Thank you, sir. So I think the conference has basically been focusing on health, and I'm perhaps one of those odd ones out who's working on livelihoods. But yes, I want to talk about livelihoods because I think the whole issue of health, nutrition, sanitation is also deeply linked with the question of livelihoods. So let me start by talking a little about what I do. I work with an organization called Bharat Rural Livelihoods Foundation. We work in the Central Indian tribal belt. And why do we work there? You see, the tribals of India, especially in Central India, are at the receiving end of the greatest neglect of our entire development process. In terms of deprivation, when we look at whether it's economic deprivation indicators or health or literacy or anemia in pregnant women, we find that scheduled tribes of India are the lowest. Means they're ranked even below scheduled castes and of course much below all general categories. Access to water, access to sanitation, access to electricity, they are amongst the most deprived. A typical tribal household, the value of the assets possessed by these tribals is 1/3 of the assets possessed by the general category of non-tribals in India. And when we look at Central India, we find that there are about 10 states which make up the bulk of tribal population in India. 75% of tribals live in these 10 states in Central India. And you will be surprised, we are talking a lot about entrepreneurship. We are talking a lot, I heard many excellent speakers talk about entrepreneurship, about growth, about challenges. In my mind, the greatest entrepreneur that exists today are the poor in this country. Every day is a challenge for them, and every day they find innovative solutions to meet these challenges. We don't know, for instance, that 70% of our tribal population also owns land. All our tribal population in Central India are landowners, but 70% of them migrate to offer their labor in the labor market, despite having land. So they are entrepreneurs. They are struggling to be entrepreneurs. What do they need? Some kind of startup mechanism, to use your language. Some kind of incubation fund. And where should that come from? I think when we talk about, double-digit growth, $5 trillion economy, etc., we tend to assume that whenever we allow the free play of markets, somehow everything will happen, everything will fall into place. What is wrong with our society? It's the government. So we are actually now standing at a point where we find that red tape, bureaucracy, these are the root of our problems. But let's try to flip the coin. What all can markets do and what all can't they do? Today, Delhi is reeling under pollution. Can markets solve the problem? Air is a free good. Have you heard of market failure? Please, have you heard of market failure? How many of you are from School of Development Studies? Do you know about market failure? Have you been taught about market failure? When does this market failure take place? when the market fails to allocate resources efficiently. And these are typically cases when certain principles are violated. In the case of public goods, water, for instance, air. The air we breathe is not owned by anybody and is not supplied to anybody against a charge. When there are externalities, I am a farmer, I drill a tube well, that leads to the level of water in the adjacent field going down. These are externalities. So markets fail also. Huh? Markets are not a god sitting there to retrieve everybody from their pain and distress. So what do we need to make our tribal farmers genuine entrepreneurs? They just need a bit of public investment, and that is where the role of the government is absolutely critical. And this is where the first two sustainable development goals also come in, an end to poverty and an end to hunger. This cannot be achieved unless there is a partnership with the state. And mind you, all this talk about the state withering away, etc., and going off, and is not going to happen anytime very soon, as far as I can see. The state is required. Elementary political economy will tell you that the only agency in our society, which is the last resort of the poor, is the state. Which doesn't mean that I am against private enterprise. But I'm just talking about the need to balance things and think a little more creatively. So the first step is state investment. What does Bharat Rural Livelihoods Foundation do? We work with civil society organizations in our tribal belt. And we help them with some finances. They work with tribal communities, they mobilize these tribal communities, they equip these tribal communities with the necessary know-how, and these tribal communities then demand from the state the services that are their right. Right to work is a right today of the Indian, guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. So is the right to food. So our partners mobilize these tribal communities. How do you use the right to work? Imaginatively. One is an income transfer scheme. You get income and you spend that income. The other is that the same amount of money that is coming in the form of employment guarantee can be used to create water harvesting structures, can be used to create proper soil and moisture conservation applications in your field. Remember, 70% of tribal farmers are forced to migrate despite having land. So if we ease the constraints on the land through minimal public investment of 1 lakh, 1.5 lakhs, once in a lifetime, the trend is reversed. I know of so many families who have benefited from our work exactly in this way. Some water is insured, they start irrigating their crops. From a 1-crop household, they go into 2 or 3 crops. You see, until we recognize that livelihoods is central to this whole issue of health, and the two are closely linked, I think the discussion will largely remain incomplete. Today, why are the poor not in a position to access health services? Because of their poverty, right? And today, what happens to the poor when somebody in their family falls seriously ill, when there's a medical emergency? Their livelihoods go down. They dip into their savings, they run to take a loan, and then they are indebted. And let me bring you a stark example. The state runs nutritional rehabilitation centers. You might have heard of them. For severe acute malnourishment. Children are supposed to be taken to these rehabilitation centers, given a proper regulated diet, etc. for 15 days. Then they attain a certain weight and they come back to their families. I have found in my own personal experience many tribal families with children who are severely and acutely malnourished. They don't want to send their children to these health centers, to these nutritional rehabilitation centers. And why? Because somebody needs to be with that child. And if if either mother or father spends those 15 days at the NRC, then what will happen to the income source? So I don't think we can ignore the interconnection. So they say, no, it's all right, we'll deal with this problem at home. And you know that they'll probably not be able to deal with it. But you are helpless, you can't do anything. Because they say that if both of us go, or if even one of us go, what will happen to our food, to our incomes? So we are in a certain kind of a situation where we can't afford to ignore either of the two things. Livelihoods on the one side, incomes are absolutely important. The poor don't have a voice because they are poor. Let us simply face this. We are living in times of acute inequality, and equality is one of the SDGs also. And what this inequality does is to rob the poor of their voice. Robs them of their opportunities to effectively become entrepreneurs in the market. Does not give them access to credit. Does not give them access to the kind of raw materials they require. So they have to run here and there, take loans, and their life becomes worse. Right? The second prong is, once the state investment comes in some form, farming becomes viable, you bring farmers together in the form of farmer-producer organizations. I'll just take 2 or 3 more minutes. Then they start tackling the market as a collective force, not individually. Individually, they'll be finished if they try to approach the market. Please understand, markets don't play fair. Markets are biased in favor of those who already have assets, who are already powerful. So you have to collectivize them, you have to bring them together, and then they compete in the market as a union or a cooperative or a farmer-producer organization. These are some of the models which have shown success in our tribal belt. So I would say that what we need to do to attain some of the more important sustainable development goals, especially goal number 1, which is an end to poverty, is to bring civil society and state together. And the state has a crucial role in promising the kind of resources that are required to lift people out of poverty. It is their duty to do so. If they don't do that, and if we keep insisting on privatization and entrepreneurship, we are letting the state go off the hook. Please remember this, that we are letting the state go off the hook. They have to be accountable to the poorest in this country. And with these words, I'll just stop. And I hope we'll be able to discuss this issue more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pramatish Ambastaji. Do you have time for question and answers? 1:30 is already. Okay, so we'll invite 1 or 2 questions. Yes, the mic. And if possible, make it very short and identify to whom you're asking the question.
Hello, sir. Hello, good morning. My question is to all the panel, anyone can answer. The first thing is that the third SDG, which is good health and well-being, I want to talk to, I've just linked the this SDG with the mental status of the current generation. So the stress which is developing in the current generation, which is not taken care in the goal, I think so the NCD is also somewhere related to stress. I want to portray it like that the stress which generates to the addiction, like the stress in the students which leads to many generation like smoking and all, which is in future is results in the NCD. So I want you to just address this question, like what can we can do as a healthcare professionals to stop this, like how can we spread awareness and how can we control this?
Okay, thank you so much. This is a very good question. Anybody? Okay, to make it very quick, the stress and related to alcohol, smoking, and so forth, and then education, exam stress, and so forth. So the idea is that there's one program which I mentioned very briefly in my presentation about what is known as the universal ethics. Ethics, a code of conduct to be adopted by everyone, irrespective of what your religious belief is. So there, and this program, the idea is to be inculcated in all the institutions, universities, colleges, schools, and so forth, where young ones, they learn how to practice a sense of compassion, how to practice a sense of compassion for yourself and compassion for others by taking to drugs, by excessive, they say, the exertion into the studies, parents pressurizing the child into excessive studies and so forth. These are not really healthy. These are not being kind. These are not being wisely kind. So this program, Universal Ethics, a program which is known as the C-Learning, SEE, Social, Emotional, Ethical Learning, which luckily I've heard that this university has adopted, that it can easily be one can seek the affiliation with this program easily. This is conducted by IIHMR University, USA, and is free of cost to any institution. So this would be a brilliant idea, and your concern is amazing. This is so important because this is what many youngsters they're going through. I said 300 million people suffering from depression, and then many more into stress. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Sir, in SDG, we are just targeting over the peace and prosperity, okay? And we also always take example of Syria and Iraq, that these countries are less of peace. And what we are facing in 5 years, last 5 years, we are facing that the similar kind of thing is happening in India also. A particular kind of ideology is being imposed over the Indians, and a particular religion is being targeted. So how can we say that the peace and prosperity can achieved in SDG? This is my question, sir.
So I'm not going to compare between India and Syria, but I must tell you one thing, that there was one study that was done in somewhere in Middle East, where people tried to identify using the data analytics software that what happens to certain places where the conflict is taking place now. Say, what happened before 10 years or maybe 6 years. So, you know, in country like India, we see most of symptom of that. You are speaking about certain things, you know, in a country like India, how many times we had ever used this word like detention camps are being set up, okay? So currently we may not be at par with places in Middle East which are very conflict affected, but if we don't promote the peace aspect, justice aspect, there are time in future where we may face that. There are some symptoms that show that.
To my young friend, the reason I mentioned about Syria and, Libya and the whole of that region, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., is because the sheer scale of the problem. Because today the kind of, the kind of horror stories that you hear, and there is no end to it. That is why. And here, I think the reason why SDGs is talking about it is because as opposed to the MDGs, in the SDGs, these are probably the roles that the developed nations, industrial nations, they have agreed to, they have given them, I don't know if I'm correct, Mr. Kumar, you might know better about this, but I think this is more the role of, we are not involved there. India is not fighting in Afghanistan, but the other countries are, a lot of European and Western economies. So that's the reason, but I agree with you.
I have a question. My name is, of course, I know all of you, but to be formal, I worked in the development sectors over 60 countries, but it's a most interesting panel in the most informal way, the best of contrast. I'm drawing attention to what Geshe spoke. I think to just summarize it to what harmony means, I think SDG 1 to 10 completely talks about people harmony, and 11 to 15 talks about ecological harmony, and 16, 17 talk about spiritual harmony. I wanted to take the it's very important to talk negativities when we are on a dais. I want to draw a clue from what Deepak Rai said. This is too ambitious. Possibly there needs to be delineation, possibly there needs to be simplification. Taking the depth of expertise that most of you have, what do you think is the most challenging intervention or approach towards establishing results towards this harmony? Probably a breakaway, rather than to look at technicalities, probably to look at outcomes in terms of establishing this three harmony, which according to me is the real sustainability aspect in terms of to convert what we look in terms of perspectives, in terms of outputs, to rather to look at something that's completely, going to bring in some kind of a holistic thinking towards the process. Anybody who would like to enlighten your personal thought on this?
Okay, so I'll try to answer this question. And, you rightly pointed out the issue of harmony. But again, at the same time, if you see the SDGs, they are actually now talking about the universalization. And the way, I can talk about my sector, the way the sector has been moving, there is a focus on harmony, but again, at the same time, going for the universalization. So Deepak actually talked about the Swachh Bharat mission, which was talking about that, again, the tagline of these SDGs is about no one is left behind. So again, going for universalization, going for open defecation free environments, of course, almost everywhere. And then now the sector is coming up with the thinking that, if we are able to ensure that, people have the access to safe sanitation, why not, the safe water? So now the thinking is about, creating an environment where each and every household will have a functional household tap connection. So this is something which, one need to keep in the mind as a development, professional, that harmony is important, all the SDGs are important, and we need to, work together in a I would say integrated manner. But again, at the same time, the basic tagline, which is the basic thinking of the SDG, is about, no one is left behind. So universalization approach is something which we have seen that, it's working. Government of India is coming up with, again, a new program, Jal Jeevan Mission. I think you must have, heard about it, that each and every household will have a functional household tap connection. They talk about the Poshan Abhiyan, which is about, reducing the malnutrition drastically, again, at the same time, working on the health issues. So I think the time has come. There is hope, of course. There are challenges. But again, at the same time, if I take a clue from the earlier session, if there are no challenges, we are not required there. So we are there because the challenges are there, and then we need to find out the solutions within ourselves. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, talking about SDGs, I would like to ask about SDG 13, that is protect the planet. Since we are facing drastic climatic changes, including so many tropical cyclones we face this year, what can be done to make a remarkable impact towards achieving this goal? The second part of the question is, we are talking about rural India here, whose basic aim that they can only earn a living. So how can they be made aware to play their part into this? Thank you.
So I can answer the first part of it, then second probably related to livelihoods. Of course, climate change is a big challenge to our programs, not just, in terms of, reaching to the universalization, but again, at the same time, sustaining the gain which have actually, we have reached till now. So now the programs are being, designed in a manner that, the climate change is supposed to be, part of it. We also call it, risk-informed programming. So if we are planning a program for water supply, let's say, so water supply programs are supposed to be risk-informed. Risk which is actually coming from the climate. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. In the state of Rajasthan, we talk about droughts almost every 3 years. So if we are going to, provide water supply in the rural areas, how can we ensure that, those rural supplies are sustainable in the most challenging situation when there is a drought? Again, at the same time, maybe you talked about cyclone.
Because sir, this year we have faced a lot of climatic changes.
Exactly. So our programs are now supposed to be, risk informed. And this is something which is now, has to be there in our programming. And which is now coming up. There have been, a lot of innovations where communities have been, mobilized. They have been made resilient about, these, climatic changes. And again, talking about the traditional wisdom, how the traditional wisdom can be, utilized in terms of ensuring the sustainability of, your program, and specifically talk about, water sanitation or supply or water or sanitation sectors. So this is the thing which is actually coming up. It's not new, but this is being, I would say an area where a lot of exploration is required.
Yeah. I'll just like to say that some of the work that I spoke about, like water harvesting, reforestation, this is inextricably linked to livelihoods as well as to addressing the issues of climate change. Ecological restoration and livelihoods are linked to each other, and we must understand this. So the kind of work that is now being emphasized in terms of local strategies for environmental regeneration are an answer to the question of climate change. I also would not agree with you that rural India is basically into making a livelihood, so how can we make them aware? I think people have a lot of wisdom, and we must learn to respect that. They are the ones actually dealing with the business of climate change in the worst possible manner. So I don't think we need to make them too much aware of that. What we need to do is to figure out ways in which this whole trend can be reversed. Finally, I just wanted to say, although this is not related to livelihoods, but there is this question about tension and how to deal with it. I was reading a study that today the youth are a lot more tense and a lot more anxious than they were earlier. I think we need to refer to his presentation and one word within that presentation, which is about compassion. I think the challenge is that all of us are becoming more and more isolated and individualistic in our entire thing. We refuse to see that we are interconnected. The more we think of others, whatever work we do, when we work for others, I think our anxiety comes down. I mean, apart from the lovely practices that he made us do and he talked about, I think the key to remembering is that there is still scope to see yourself as part of a larger society and to work towards that.
Thank you all. Thank you all the eminent speakers for the remarkable speech. It was indeed a great pleasure. I now request Ms. Anuradha, Dean of School of Developmental Studies, to kindly felicitate the chair for the session. Cancel. ठीक है अच्छा I now request Dr. Gautam Sadhu to kindly felicitate the co-chair for the session. That's all, right? Coach. Pradanya. I now request the chair for the session to kindly felicitate Mr. Pankaj Mathur. I also request the chair of the session to kindly felicitate Mr. Deepak Roy. I request the co-chair of the session to kindly felicitate Mr. Prabhat Kumar. Thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of session 5 for Annual Conference Pradanya 2019. I am thankful to all the guests of honor and the participants. We will now proceed for lunch break for 1 hour. You all are requested to assemble back here at 2:30